It's a loophole in the law. Former elected officials are allowed to keep their campaign finance funds forever, even if they never plan to run for office again, and even after they die. There's been virtually no oversight on how tens of millions of campaign contributions are spent. Tonight, KPIX 5 political reporter Melissa Caen follows the money in a questionable Bay Area case.
10 years ago, people around the world mourned the death of Bay Area Congressman Tom Lantos. But even though he was dead, his campaign bank account stayed very much alive.
They're called zombie campaigns because while there's no live candidate anymore, someone continues to spend the money from the campaign bank account. And this is legal if it's done by the rules, which say the money can go to charity, it can go to other candidates and campaigns, and it can go to office expenses as long as the money is not for personal use.
In Lantos's case, there was $1.4 million in the campaign fund when he died, and most of that went to the Lantos Foundation for Human Rights, run by his daughter, Katrina Sweat. But we noticed that in the 4 years after the congressman passed away, the biggest expense was for a company called Intelligent Software Systems. It was collecting $3,000 to $5,000 a month for a total of $181,000. So who or what is Intelligent Software Systems? Well, since 2003, there has been no such company registered to do business in California. So we called the person who wrote the checks, campaign treasurer Janet Zeleny. She did not return our calls.
Hello?
So we went to her home, but she refused to answer the door. As we drove away, we got a call.
Maybe you might want to do is to go to the FEC website.
A few days later, in an email, Janet told us that Intelligent Software Systems is her doing business as, or DBA. In other words, it's her. She claims she paid herself for doing a significant amount of work for the campaign, including Federal Election Commission filings and research and execution of donations.
It strikes me as totally inappropriate.
Ann Ravel is the former head of the Federal Elections Commission. She says treasurers of campaigns are allowed to pay themselves a salary, but it has to be reasonable.
The fact that there is that amount of money after the candidate has died and there is really very little activity, it's unconscionable.
What is so complicated about that?
Tom Lantos was a particularly ethical person, someone who really cared about his community, which is one reason why I presume he was consistently not just elected, but revered by his constituents. And this is the total opposite of that.
It turns out this case is not isolated.
You haven't campaigned in 5.5 years, but you still have a campaign account open.
I do.
How come?
A joint investigation by our affiliate station WTSP and the Tampa Bay Times found that roughly 100 zombie campaigns are still spending lavishly for years after their candidates have left office.
It's disappointing, to say the least.
This man donated $3,300 to the Lantos campaign in 2007, the year before he died.
I liked what he stood for. He had a lot of interest in various situations around the world where people were being treated unfairly and so forth. He was a great champion of all of that, and I just always assumed that if somebody passes away, then there was a very strict process for what happens to the leftover funds and so forth. And apparently that's not the case.
Now, Ellen Weintraub is the current vice chair of the FEC, and she says they are rolling out a new policy.
We're going to be giving extra scrutiny to campaigns where the candidate has either died, unfortunately, or has not been running for office for 2 years in the case of House candidates, or 4 years in the case of candidates for the Senate or for the presidency. We want to make sure that no one is converting campaign funds to personal use, which is banned under the law.
One thing they'll be looking at is whether paying someone like Janet so much money for years after a candidate's death amounts to illegal personal use.
But at a certain point, one has to ask, what is this committee doing any longer, since it is by definition a committee that was set up to advance someone's campaign for office.
In San Carlos, Melissa Caen, KPIX 5.
KPIX 5 contacted the Lantos Foundation to see if perhaps they were using Janet's services or were aware of her high fees. They never returned our call.